if you can't change the people around you, then change the people around you.
The power of knowing yourself. Something might not be impacting you, something that might be going on right now in the world, but it could be impacting other people on your team and how they're showing up. There's no guarantee about the future. There's no guarantee about promotions, etc. You should do stay interviews instead of exit interviews.
Oh, that's the podcast right there. Holy moly. I've never heard that ever. Hey, welcome to the Relevant Development Podcast. I am your host, Juan Alvarado. Today's guest is, like DJ Khaled would say, another Juan, right? Juan Taveras. How you doing, Juan?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Juan.
Awesome. Don't get confused with two different Juans. I'm sure we sound a little bit different, but if you're on Spotify or Apple, you can jump on YouTube and you can see the difference. One has hair and the other one doesn't. So Juan, tell us a little bit about you and your background and where you are today.
Absolutely, yes. My name is Juan Taveras, and I am a human resources and diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. And I've been doing this work for over 17 years, both in the for-profit and the nonprofit sector, managing teams as small as 30 and as high as, I think the highest team I managed was 500. And by team, I mean folks under me that I supported. And then a year ago, I went off on my own. So I started my own consulting firm and I've got a couple projects that I'm excited about now, some passion projects. But yeah, continuing to do work in the HR space and helping leaders create inclusive workplaces. That's my thing.
Awesome. So a couple questions. What made you want to jump off into your own? I mean, because that's hard for people, right? To leave a regular, job or 9 to 5, to work for someone, to then work for yourself. Done it, and probably one of the most difficult decisions that I've made. How did that come to be for you?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. It definitely was not an easy decision. Definitely required a leap of faith. But I would say the main reason was a misalignment between my values and that of the organization that I was at. And I could have easily gone to another organization, but this was business ownership has been on the back of my mind for a long time. And I said, you know what, this is it. This is my opportunity to try it out, go off on my own and see where it takes me. So here I am.
So I tell people this in that teachers, educators, like you have to be a special person to work with junior high kids. Elementary school kids, cool. High school kids, like their development and their understanding is different. You have to be a special kind of person to work in junior high. I would also say that you have to be a special kind of person to want to work in HR. Why HR? Because I think there's different views of HR as far as what they do and what capacity. But why HR, and where's your mojo when it comes to HR?
Yeah, here's what I'll say. I don't know how often you've heard this from other HR professionals, but HR found me, right? I went to school for hospitality, and did go into the hospitality industry for a few years, but then stumbled upon an opportunity to lead HR for a nonprofit in New York City. And that was my first taste of it. And it was really, that first role was more operations focused. So it was more on the benefits, payroll side, more, less people, but slowly but surely, I started to gain more and more responsibility on the people-facing side of things. I got my certification, so I got hooked. I like to think that I bring the hospitality training that I got through my education, which is about taking care of people at the end of the day. It's about creating, inviting, and welcoming spaces so that customers keep coming back. I bring that mentality into the HR space. And I'll also share, probably like many of us and your listeners, I had a really negative experience in the workplace, right? Where I didn't feel supported by HR or my leader. So that was also a drive for me I was like, if I can make a difference there, then that's where I want to be. So that HR gave me that opportunity to really have a bigger influence on the experiences of others.
Yeah, a gentleman that I follow who was a mentor and business coach of mine, his name's Rory Vaden, and I quote him a lot. And he says, you are perfectly positioned to serve the person who you once were, right? So hurt by HR, and now you do what you do, right? You're perfectly positioned for that. Just to jump into it, and we talked a little bit beforehand that I was just going to get into it. I love the fact that you bring in the hospitality side of things, because that's the people side of things, right? And it seems as if, because one of my biggest mistakes as a leader is moving people up the ranks because they were really good at their job.
Yeah.
And I feel my thought process, and I think there's a lot of people out there that will agree with me, and there's going to be people who don't, that just because you're good at a job doesn't necessarily make you promotable to work with people. And I think from possibly experience that the person who kind of did you wrong in the HR might have been really good on the paper policy side of things, but not really good on the person side of things. And one of the people that I had moved up through the ranks was really good at their position, but it didn't know how to work with people. And I found that was one of my biggest mistakes as a leader. Just because you've been here for a long time and just because you're really good at your job doesn't equate to a promotion, one, but doesn't necessarily promote to a position where you deal with people. And so do you find that maybe a mistake of people who move up through HR or in HR profession is like, we have paper people who need to stay paper people, and then we need to have people
Absolutely.
for those positions? How do you feel on that?
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I see this even outside of HR, right? It plays out in a lot of different scenarios. But in HR, I also joined the industry. This is now 15 years ago, during a time where HR was transitioning from an administrative function to more of a strategic level function, right? So it was the time in the early 2000s where, a lot of growth was happening and retention was a big issue. It wasn't enough to just have a competitive salary. Like, people were looking for experiences, right? Like, they wanted to believe in your brand. They cared about ethics. And that's only intensified, right? With the new generation in the workforce. So it is not enough to be really good at what you do. You really have to understand people and know how to motivate people and connect with people in an authentic way in order to be a good leader. So yeah, 100% with you.
What do you think has to change in the structure of not only organizations, right? Bosses, managers, leaders, directors, line staff, people who you probably consult, right? And help out. What has to change within that and or the HR department as a whole, where it's like, how do we get the right people in the right spots?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you said something earlier about, I think you said this, leveraging you could be really good at something, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't translate across other areas of work. And specifically, what I will point out is soft skills, right? And we hear about soft skills, like the people skills, but it's also like understanding yourself. And this is a lot of the work that I do in my leadership coaching. Is oftentimes the issues that leaders are experiencing on their teams are a symptom of something deeper, right? And that root cause points back to them. It's something that they're not fully understanding yet about their strengths or their values or their style and how they show up. And I've noticed a lot of leaders trying to be something they're not, right? So going back to your point about they want to be a leader for the title or for that extra money, but they don't fully think through what is my leadership brand, right? And how do I want to impact the people that are on my team? So leaders that take the time to figure that out, which requires a lot of self-work, are much better positioned to lead strong teams.
Yeah, I love the fact that you've used this word, I think 2 or 3 times already. What is your leadership brand? I think there's branding within branding within branding, right? And I think organizations, I work a lot with school districts and offices of ed, but the ed space, right? And you find that, and other organizations do this too, where they have these crazy mission and vision statements that sound really cool and smart and these big old words. It's like, just keep it simple. Because if you go to the employees and say, okay, what's the mission and vision of your organization? A lot of them don't even know. It's like, how am I supposed to show up and work for an organization and help them along the way? If one, I don't know where my position is or what my job is supposed to be in moving the peg along the journey. And if I don't know how to recite or know the values that I'm supposed to be standing behind or getting behind. And it's funny that people don't understand that as a leader, there's branding. Who do you want people to see you as? What is your character, right? And then what is the brand of my employees? And I find that, and if we can go here for a second, that even though the organization has a mission and a vision and a quote unquote so-called culture, it doesn't mean anything if the people can't follow that or there's not accountability to it. Because I find that the people that work there day in and day out who are with each other start to create their own culture, and it becomes, I don't want this to come off too too negatively, but there's another, I want to say like a cancer, right? Where it just starts to
Mm.
eat. We'll call it like weeds for that matter. The weeds start to take over the grass, and
Yep.
what was now green and luscious grass looks good from afar, right? Because it's green. But as you get closer, you're like, oh, this is not grass. These are weeds. And the culture starts to change because the people start to create their own culture. Is that a leadership problem, or does that become an HR problem? Where do people go from there?
That's a great question. I love that analogy really quick before I answer that question, because one analogy that I use with leaders often is you, as a leader, your team is a garden, right? That you're tending to, and you have different types of plants, types of flowers, or whatever it is. And each of those things require a different kind of maintenance, right? Some plants require more water than others, more sunlight than others, different kinds of soil. So you as a leader are cultivating, right, this patch and ensuring and giving each individual what they need to be successful. So to answer your question, I think it's both, right? So first, you hear a lot that culture starts at the top, right? So there's the topmost leader sort of sets the tone for, and I'll go there, what's going to be accepted or permissible within an organization. So to your point, those weeds are allowed to grow because nobody's picking them, right? Like if and that's how weeds operate. Like you just, if you let them go, they're gonna take over. And to your point, that's very much what happens in cultures. And what I have noticed, there's a fear, right, for leaders to, especially in today's workplace where everything is, there's a lot of division, there's a lot of polarization. So there's a lot of fear of like saying the wrong thing or
Yep.
calling somebody out, and then what happens, right? You get canceled or whatever it may be. But this is why I go back to that values alignment. Like if you're clear on what your values are, both your own, but also the businesses and the organization that you're working with, and you know what you're driving towards, then you have that clarity. That's like, okay, that's not going to get us there. So that's why I'm stepping in and plucking this weed because it's not helping, right? You could argue that there's a time and a place. Like sometimes the weeds show up because something is wrong or something's missing, right? Again, going back to how you're tending that soil. But in either scenario, you need to address it. It needs to be taken on head on as a leader.
Well, I think going back to something that you said earlier that I love that you said, and I forgot it, and then it came right back, was that we address the symptom. And sometimes that's what we do, is we address the symptom and not the actual cause, right? Yeah. We are, going back to the whole weeds thing, we're spraying the weeds. However, we need to take care of the neighbor. The wind's blowing this way. I noticed this the other day. Neighbor down the street has all these weeds, right? And then they finally get to cutting their grass and clipping the weeds, but they're just with the weed whacker. And then all of a sudden, all these seeds from the weeds are coming down. And yeah, I could spray all I want, but as long as that person down the road continues to have weeds and the wind blows, it's going to spread. And weeds are going to be inevitable. However, we can stay on top of the issue and not just take care of the symptom. And I think we do that a lot, right? Oh, let me take care of antacids, right? I have really bad acid reflux or whatever. And you're taking care of the symptom, but it's like, you need to take care of your whole diet. Like it's something bigger than that. You need to go to the doctor for like gut health and all this other stuff. So I just love the fact that you said the whole symptom thing, but how do we address that? Because you also said something in this last part where you talked about, people are afraid. There are people afraid. I want to say something, or I say something to my coworker, and then all we're doing is we are fortifying our foundation in, I don't like this person. They always do this, and they're always, and they're the issue here. And they're like, yeah, me too. And I see that. And so now we stick our feet and our heels into the dirt, not liking somebody. And that's just as bad as the person who's causing the issue. But I don't want to say anything because they work for HR, or HR's behind it, or whatever. They're friends with the person from HR, and somehow HR is connected to it one way or another. So then if I know, hey, this is what we stand for in this business, it says that we put people first, but I feel like I'm not even second, third, or fourth. I'm last, and everyone keeps on putting other things before the employee. I want to say something. What do you say to that person who is too scared to say something because they don't know what's going to happen, and HR might be part of that?
Oh gosh. Yeah. That resonates with me. Again, the story that I shared earlier, one of the reasons that I came into HR, but also even, and I don't know, if you're watching on YouTube, you get a sense of my vibe and my personality. Like I try to be a very approachable HR leader and want people to build trust and have that comfort level with coming to me with any issues. And even still, I would hear things through the grapevine, or, people would just not come to HR because of what the title, like the org chart, right? Like, I report to the president. So whose side are you really on? That kind of thing. So here's what I would say. First, I think having a conversation about, like, especially if you feel like the organization or a leader or a group of people are not living up to the organization's values, I think that's worth having a conversation. Like, even if you don't know where that might lead, it might not lead anywhere, but raising it, and I know this is going to have to require people to step out of their comfort zone, right? To have those conversations is important. And here's what I'll say: if HR doesn't feel safe, which is a reality, I'm not gonna pretend that that's not the case, then lean on your coworkers, or maybe there's a leader in another team or department that you trust or have a relationship with, but do it in a productive way, right? Because one of the things, and I think this is where you might have been going, Juan, is when you do that without being solutions focused, then that's where the weeds come in. That's just gossip and rumors, and that's just going to lead to more of the same. But if you're really interested in making a change, then build a cohort, build a group of people, because HR may not listen to one person, but they'll listen to five. If a group of folks are coming up with the same issue or concern. There are many times in my own HR experience where that's how I have found out about a leader's poor behavior, right? An entire team came to me, not just one individual, because again, you also have to think about all the different perspectives and what would you call it? Like, something that bothers me might not bother my colleague, right? So It doesn't necessarily mean that the leader's doing anything wrong per se if it's bothering just one individual. But if it's five people, then that's got my attention, right? So that's one suggestion. I would say if HR doesn't feel safe and your leader doesn't feel safe, then create a group of folks that can stand beside you and serve as witnesses to what's going on, because it's hard to ignore a group as opposed to an individual. Yeah.
Right. For sure. Yeah. Cause it's really hard, because you have those people who go to HR for everything, every little thing. And then, then you have the other extreme where somebody doesn't even feel safe to do it. And it's like, what is the difference between those two people? And sometimes that person going all the time, stuff gets done, stuff doesn't. But it just seems as if there's no middle ground in there. So either you go to them all the time or you don't, but it's that fear. And so I have to ask the question of, like, again, if somebody's afraid and that's the culture, but yet we have an open door culture, an open door policy, and everyone is supposed to get together. It's like, I think this is what happens, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as if somebody along the lines in any department, whether it's a business department or a budget department or HR department, but since we're talking about HR, we'll stay there. If somebody gets high enough that their own belief or their own value system becomes the value system and no longer the company's value system. And then what we get, I'm getting ready to do a post part 1 and then do a part 2 to the 7 deadly sins of an organization. And one of them is, this is how we've always done it, or they don't want to question anything. That's how we've always done it. Well, you're like, why? And then you start to follow the rabbit trail a little bit, and it ends with, the head of HR said no to somebody because maybe they didn't like them, or maybe they didn't want to that day. And so now we say no to everything, or we only say yes to these people. And I mean, you hear these horror stories of, like, my vacation didn't get approved because I didn't do it in 12 days in advance and I only did it in 10 days in advance, or I'm not getting paid my mileage or my hotel stay for going to this conference, but somebody else did because there's only so many people that can. Or I'm like, where did that come from? Like, that's just the rule. Well, where? Because there's nothing in our documentation that says that. And it seems as if somebody in this higher up space just does it, and then nobody asks the question, or when they do, there's not a real answer. So what happens? Is that like the head of HR's fault? Is it the staff that aren't bringing it to the higher power? Or is it the leader above that says, I need to talk to the employees and see if everything is running up to par? Like, I don't want to say whose fault, but where do we start? Where do we point the finger?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Because as you were describing that scenario, I mean, the breakdown could happen at any part in that chain, right? So it could be a well-intentioned senior leader who is just blind or oblivious to a lot of because a lot of the issues you described are more day-to-day, like tactical stuff that usually more middle managers or junior HR folks are doing the day-to-day. So I have questions around, like, how did those people get trained? Who trained them? How were they onboarded? How were they brought on to these policies? And then how were they told to deal with concerns or complaints from their employees.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of hard to to dissect this without more information. But like I said, it could the breakdown can happen at any level. And you said something earlier that is I have seen, and sadly it's a reality, when someone gets into a high level position, that comes with power and authority, and as humans we all have the ability to lose sight of even how we got started, or what it was like to be an individual contributor that didn't have any power or authority, right? And that sort of gets into our heads in this title, and now you sort of lose sight of why your role exists and why you're there. So, and another piece of what you described makes me think of something that my wife and I are working a lot on right now, is this idea of psychological safety in the workplace. And what it takes to create that, because what we're going back to this idea of the fear that's in the workplace right now, that stems from constantly being in flight or freeze mode, right? It's just, I don't want to lose my job, so I'm not going to do anything that is going to disrupt or challenge any leaders or anything like that. So that will show up if you're on the HR team. That's going to show up like not taking care of your employees, right? Not following through on even our understanding our written policies, right? It's just so many different issues that stem from this idea of not being safe, right, in the workplace. And it's not anybody's, like, not any one individual's fault. Like, to your point from earlier, like, culture is not something that one person controls, or obviously leaders have the ability to influence that more than others, but it's hard to put your finger on until you get in there and start dissecting. Now, for the individual, sorry,
I was going to agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. I want to speak to your audience, because if you're currently in that situation where you're questioning policies that don't make sense, or you feel like your HR team doesn't have your back, there are things you can do to essentially protect yourself, right? Like, guard yourself, and remember that at the end of the day, that employer-employee relationship sits on an agreement, right? You're going to get X, a salary plus benefits or whatever it is that you get in exchange for your talent and services for X number of hours a week, right? Whatever that agreement is, that is at the core of it. So that's, I like to remind my clients of that, because oftentimes it helps to diffuse some of that fear. That it's like, oh yeah, at the end of the day, I'm getting paid to do this job, right? And everything else is sort of extra. And sometimes the extra doesn't work in my favor, or I don't like it, or I want other different extras, which you can work on, right? But if you're clear on that foundation, then it really, I think from my perspective, it helps you sort of separate. It's not so emotional. It's not so personal. It's like, okay, yeah, I got to remember that I'm an employee, and there's an agreement here in place, and that everything else that's extra, I have to navigate.
Right. I think it's important for people to. I want to do a podcast on this. I'm starting to write it out and all the information, and I'll kind of give you a glimpse into that. But it kind of speaks to what you're saying of like, it's not that I have to go to work. It's a blessing, right? I get to go to work. You have a special set of skills. Yeah. An employer needs you to do those skills, and they're going to pay you to do it. And now you go to trainings, or you go to other things to help further your knowledge, your expertise in that. And when you practice every day, or you do it every day, now, like in sports, we practice, like in baseball, a double play over and over and over again, a double play from first and second, or a double play, tagging home and then going to first, or whatever it is. You practice, and then the coach says, all right, now it's time to go to work. Put the things that you've learned into practice. So when we go to work, you're putting into play all of your education, all of your knowledge, the new things that you've learned. Now it's time to go to work. Like, let's go to work. And people take it as, I have to go to work, right? It's that thing that I don't want to go do, but yet you get paid for. You're getting paid for those things. And I think it was Jim Rohn that says, you don't get paid per hour, but you get paid by for the value that you bring to that hour. If you want to get paid more, bring more value to the hour. And once you can prove that you can bring more value to the hour, well, then that's when you can get paid more. And I think we kind of lose sight of the main mundane Groundhog's Day. I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. And work starts to pile up and pile up and pile up. And then it's, well, she's not doing her share, and he's not doing his share. And then it's, and then it becomes, craziness at work. I don't know if you, on the stuff that you and your wife go over, do you guys is it just the psychological kind of part of that HR, or do you guys go over like hiring practices and things like that as well?
So on the psychological safety side, it's really about creating it, how to create it and maintain it on teams. But in
Mhm.
my own consulting work, I do an audit, an HR audit, to make sure that your policies and even your procedures, like how things happen, are inclusive and mindful of the experience of your employees. So somebody wouldn't go on to a conference without having first been approved, right, for those expenses, because that's a nasty surprise to not
Right.
get reimbursed.
The reason why I was asking, because I didn't know if I wanted to go here on the hiring practices, but you hear a lot of people who don't get hired for a position, and maybe they have tons of experience, or they don't have the experience, but they might have the know-how and the will to do it, and they maybe don't have the right stuff on the resume. And I find I find it funny that there's certain people that get positions and then there's issues later on down the line because they checked all the boxes, as opposed to somebody who doesn't check the boxes but just has the will, the desire to work, and the passion to work. Where does HR go in hiring from what's right to doing what's right? Right? Because what's the right thing to do would be like, oh, we want somebody who's got a BA or a master's or an AA, whatever it is, right? Somebody who's got 3 to 5 years of experience. You see all this stuff. And then you have somebody that says, I don't have that, but I know that I can do the job.
Right.
And for instance, my wife wanted to go out for a position at a school district and she didn't have her degree. However, she was doing financial stuff for another school district. That's not what they hired her to do. She was the insurance tech and they needed some help with some spreadsheets, and she found issues and problems on the spreadsheet on a whim. Let me just look at it. And so she did it. And they're like, we've been looking at this for hours and you found it in minutes. What the heck? And so they started giving her stuff. So when she wasn't doing insurance stuff, they were giving her spreadsheets and she was figuring out issues and reconciling stuff. And then that position opened and she got it. She started doing that stuff as an accountant without an accounting degree, but we do that. We see that with teachers, right? We'll give you an emergency credential, right? We just need teachers, right? And so we'll give you this because we know that you can do it. And so she wanted to apply for a job at a different school district, and she said, hey, I don't have the degree in accounting, but I do the same job. And luckily she got the job. She applied for it anyways. Can I do like years of service as opposed to, the degree? But I'm sure that there's a number of people that can do a job because they know how, they're just really good, they're gifted. And somebody who checks the boxes, who has everything that they want, gets the job. And then there's issues later on.
Yeah.
Not a good worker, they're slow, they complain, they do whatever. It's like, where do we find the balance in finding the ideal worker compared to the person who can just kill it at the job?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I know a lot of HR folks struggle with, right? Because there's this idea of, and I'm going to use a term that I'm sure you're familiar with, but that has actually gotten bad rap recently, but the idea of culture fit, right? So you want to attract candidates for positions that can do the job, and how you define that can be a number of ways, right? So the safest way, I'll use that word, is to have a list of required credentials, whether it's education, degree, certifications, experience, because that gives us a tangible, something to grasp onto, like, oh yeah, they will likely be successful in this role because they have these things. It's not guaranteed though, to your point, because that's only part of the equation. The other part is, can this individual work with our people? Can they fit into the culture that we've created here? And I use that word with caution, because this idea of fitting in then, right, requires, it almost implies that you can't be yourself. You have to be something that the organization wants you to be. And that's where it's hard to eke that out in an interview process. If somebody is essentially showing up as what you want them to be, then they will likely get the job because they check off the boxes and they're saying the right things, they look the right way or whatever it is. And then they get the job and the issues start to happen because you didn't go past that. So yeah. So I think there's you first start by unpacking, like, what does success look like in this role, right? And it's not just the qualifications, which don't always translate to success, right? Like, it's, to your point, you could have the experience without having the degree, or you can have, this is a job you've been doing as an entrepreneur, and you don't have whatever XYZ they're looking for. But then the second piece, like I said earlier, is that how is this individual going to add value to the team or the organization? How are they going to show up every day? What is their work ethic? And there are ways to get at that in like situational interviewing questions during the interview process. But I've seen more and more folks practice that, especially, you might have noticed in job descriptions, I've seen often, even if you don't qualify, we want you to apply if you don't check off all these boxes, because we're looking for a diverse group of candidates that we can entertain. So yeah, there's some progress being made in that space, but hiring is so hard. Yeah.
And it's funny because there's people who, again, like you're talking about, people are afraid to speak up because they're afraid to offend somebody. And it seems like everybody, in some way or another, can get offended with anything. And so I remember one time I had an engagement to go speak, and someone at the very end had said, "I'm so glad that you said yes, because we were really looking for a Latino speaker." And I'm like, so did you pick me because you liked what I brought to the table, or did you just like me because the Alvarado last name? Like,
Yeah.
and other people would have been like, "You looking for a Mexican speaker? You need me." There you go. And so I didn't really take necessarily offense to it, but then it brought up questions. I was like, so
Yes.
what did you look at first? Or what was the real, the real thing? And other people, for that matter, will say, "I want you to hire me because of my background," or whatever it is to the table. So I think it depends on what the employer values, but then also what the individual values too. Because some people value their culture over everything, or value their skin tone, or the fact that they, are bilingual, trilingual, or whatever,
Right. Right.
and they might not know how to do a job. So when you talk about this, what was it called? The
Culture
cultural
fit.
fit.
Yeah.
I think it depends on how you interpret that, right? Do you want me to fit into your box, or do you want me to fit the way like my individual fit? I think it's up for interpretation. Like, hey, here you go. Here's a softball. Do what you want to do with it. I think I don't know. When you said the cultural fit part, I was like, oh, I thought one thing, but then when you started to say, hey, the organization wants you to fit and be this person that you're not, I'm like, oh shoot, that's not even the way I was thinking.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
just cool that, or different, and for people to understand that there's different ways of thinking, which is why we need different people. I remember my boss saying, if you and I think the same, then there's no need for one of us. And I'm the CEO, so I'm not going anywhere. So bye, see you later. Like, I want you to help me see something from different angles, and the hope is that, and I don't mean to continue to bash on any one or position, but it's like that would be the hope, that HR or business departments, or whether you're a boss, CEO, CFO, whatever it is that you bring different people to the table for the difference of the thought process, right? To think a little bit differently, to make you think. On our way out of this conversation, and the way out of the podcast, I know we've done, a lot of hearsay, and are there these issues, and what do you say about these issues? Let's start going to solutions for a second, before we end it. Is how can we have that culture? What do we need to think about when we think about safety, the psychological safety? What are some 2-3 points that we should all bring, maybe not just HR, but individuals or leaders as a whole, to make sure that we have just a good foundation that we can build off of?
Love that. Yeah. And I completely agree that it's not just HR. Though HR, because of the role and the authority that they have in an organization, has the ability to influence this at a higher level. But really, anybody can. I have a few pointers that folks can do. And the first is, I mentioned earlier, the power of knowing yourself. That is where a lot of my wife is a clinical psychologist. I should have mentioned that. But I learn a lot from her, and bring a lot of what she does in her works in my coaching practice. And is, you can't do for others what you haven't done for yourself, right? So if you, as a leader, whether it's a team leader or an HR leader, if you want to create a positive and engaging and safe workplace, you first have to understand what that means for you. And doing that requires you to know your values. So there's a number of free values exercises you can do online. And also, I would add to that your strengths. So going into Strengths Finder is one of my favorites. Yes. your top 5.
Yes.
You got to know your top 5.
Real quick, what's your top 5? Do you know your top 5 off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. I'm gonna bring it because I always have it on my desk here. This comes up often.
I'm a Gallup strengths coach, so I love this stuff.
Oh, sweet. Okay. So my top is Maximizer.
Okay. I love this stuff. If you get strengths and you understand, okay. All right.
Then Relator. So that's my one-on-one people connecting.
Yeah.
Harmony. Achiever. And Consistency.
I was going to say consistency would be there, doing the work that you do, and it was either going to be harmony or positivity. Would have been one of those. I would love to see what your full 34 report is, to see what those are on 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
The stuff is just so good, but I agree with you. And if we can sit here for just a second,
absolutely,
is when you understand self and strengths, and you understand strengths so much that then you can start learning about somebody else's strength. Like if I understand my strengths, let me see if I can find out the person that I work with the most, or my, the coworker to my left or my right, my boss or whatever. It is so eye-opening to understand other people. Like, oh, This is why they get upset when I talk to them, right? My sister listens to all my podcasts. She's a huge supporter of mine, and I love it. One of her strengths is context, and she's a huge storyteller.
Oh.
So she'll tell you all this information, and I'm like, just give me what you got. Like, but I have to understand she's in her strength, like
Yeah.
where she hangs her hat, and what makes her amazing is she tells this story and she can paint you a picture and you don't even need to close your eyes or think because she's going to paint that picture for you. But if we work together, I can easily then say, if she says, we're working together and she says, hey, do you have a sec? I'm like, I don't, but I have 10 minutes in about 30 minutes. So come back in 30 minutes and I'll give you 10 minutes because then I have this, whatever. So then she knows, all right, I got 10 minutes to do or say or ask or whatever it is. But then we're able to communicate better through understanding one another, right?
Absolutely.
If she's a context person and I don't have this, but if I go off if I want like content, right, and I'm a data person because I'm a strategic thinker and I have analytical, she might just say, hey, if I want to make this 10 minutes or I only have 10 minutes, I better give him the data, I better give him numbers, I better give him this. And so you're just able to communicate that much better. So I love your number one in know self and know your strengths.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. I geek out on that, on this kind of stuff. It's really powerful. The other thing I would mention is, when you're a part of a team, and this is going back to that foundation, right? So you've got this agreement with this organization, you've got this job you're getting paid to do, but now you're a member of a team. So let's call it a community, right? And now you have a responsibility you're a member of this group. You have to, if you are down, then you bring down the average, right? And if you're up, everyone else is up. So I talk about this shared responsibility to uplift everyone in your immediate community. So one is knowing yourself, right? And knowing how you can show up and the best version of yourself, knowing your strengths and your values, and then leveraging that to connect to the strengths and values of others. So the main takeaway there of this number 2 is once you know yourself, don't keep it to yourself. You got to share it and you got to lead with it, because it's one thing for you to know it, but the more people, especially folks around you that are aware of this, to your point, Juan, is you can work better together. You're going to communicate better. You're going to partner better. You're going to be more intentional about your actions when you support each other in this way. And then the last piece I will say is going back, you mentioned this earlier, which I really appreciate, this idea of basically diversity, right? So like leveraging each other's uniqueness is what I like to call it. Like we all have different lived experience, different perspectives, and we are all impacted by the external world in different ways, right? So going back to this, being a supportive team member or community member is being aware of something might not be impacting you, something that might be going on right now in the world, but it could be impacting other people on your team and how they're showing up. So I would bundle that with like assuming best intentions. Like there are times where I'll be working with a leader and they're like, oh, this, I have this team member, they're usually a rock star, but in the last week or so, they've really been dropping balls and I just don't know what to do. And I was like, well, have you asked them what's going on? Like, have you checked in and said, hey, everything okay? Like I've noticed a change. And I think that goes a long way when people feel seen and heard. And it's like, oh, you care enough to like stop what you're doing to come ask me how I'm doing. And honestly, I'm not doing well. and then, you start that conversation and hopefully can support that person out of that slump. But those are, again, going back to the soft skills that I mentioned earlier, which is a big focus of my work. That's really where, because anybody can learn how to manage a budget or the latest tech or productivity tool. But when it comes to the real authentic connection between people, that's where the power is in a team and in an organization.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. One of the trainings that I have, leadership trainings that I have, it talks about, even though there's policies and procedure, where are the people? And you should be putting, people first. And I understand that organizations go off of policies and procedures, but sometimes you need to think about, people first. And then, even this part about that you're talking about like, did you even ask? It's like, where do we go wrong as people growing up where we lost our curiosity? Right. As a kid, kids will always ask why, or they'll say, are you okay? Right. The other day, I think it was yesterday, both my boys at the same time asked my son, Levi, are you okay? And he was like, yeah, why? And it was funny because his why wasn't like, why do you want to know? But it was like, not even like, is there anything wrong with me? But it was, why are you asking? Like, you've never asked me that before. And it was just, his why was confused, but at the same time, it was received of like, you cared enough to ask.
Yeah.
And you could just hear it and see it in his voice and his demeanor. But it was like, where do we lose our curiosity growing up as kids and to get into adulthood? My wife's parents, my in-laws say, you better learn to laugh at yourself, because if not, we're all going to laugh at you anyway. But it's like, don't take stuff so serious, but at the same time, be curious, ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would want to ask that leader that you're talking to, like, let's just sit down and think about this. The fact that you, like, it's common sense to me to ask, like, did you even ask? But if the answer is no, and you didn't ask, and that wasn't your first go-to, let's not address the symptom. Let's address the root. Like, why aren't you thinking about this? Where do we need to work on with, loving one another, caring about one another? I think it was John Maxwell that says, if we do things casually, that will cause casualties.
Ooh,
yeah.
wow.
I saw it. I was like, let me read this again. Holy moly. But
yeah, if
you just do it casually, it's going to create casualties. But if I'm curious and I start asking questions and I lead with my heart, and I try to match my heart with somebody else's, wanting to know how they're doing, it's amazing. Is there any other tips that you can give our listeners about maybe doing the right thing, or having a good culture, or caring about themselves or for others?
Let me think. We covered, those are like the first initial basics that we cover in my coaching. And then I lead into things like the importance of goal setting and having a vision. And like and actually this is related, because I wasn't sure if we were going to get there in our conversation, but I gave some tips around how to advocate for yourself in a space that isn't safe, or if you feel like you can't trust your leader or HR. And there are certain things that you can do. Also, like, know this situation that you're in right now is not the end all be all, right? Like, you can leave a bad situation. I'm not saying it's easy, like, and we all need a paycheck, but you can have a plan. It's like, hey, I tried to change the situation and it didn't work, so then I am going to make a change, right? So the importance of being really clear about what you're trying to achieve, not getting too comfortable or complacent in any given situation, because going back to that foundational piece of that agreement between you and your employer, that's what that is at its very core. So there's no guarantee about the future. There's no guarantee about promotions, etc. So yeah, having that in your back pocket.
I don't know how good you are in time, but I want to challenge you on that, because I would say, like, I'm going into a dad mode, right? I would say that if I love the advice, I do. Like, there's a saying, if you can't change the people around you, then change the people around you. Like, just go somewhere else and get different people around you.
Absolutely.
But the father in me, the leader in me, right? If I left my department where I'm at, and if somebody told me, one of my ex-employees says, you know what, I don't like it here, I'm just going to leave. My comment to them, which my question to you is, then where does it stop, right? I'm all for leaving, right? You and I both left, situations, and there's people out there that left. So I agree with that. The other side of the coin says, then where does it stop? Then evil wins, right? If the good person's trying to make a change or say something to HR or their boss or whatever, and they say, you know what, I'm just going to leave. I'm going to be the better person and leave. But what does that do for everyone else that comes after you, or those people that are still here? Like, then where does that? Because the hope would be that somebody above the top of the top says, our retention rate is horrible all of a sudden. What the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And that they would ask questions. The hope is that happens. And you would think that it would if somebody's in tune. But if they're not, again, then where does it stop? If we just leave, where does it stop? I don't know if you have an answer to that, or it's like,
no, I hear it. And I think, so it depends, right? I think it's, to your point, that's where I was going to go. It's like, well, the retention is going to cause a pain, and that pain is going to hurt enough eventually that they're going to need to address it. And if it's an individual or a group of people that are causing that pain, then, to your point, the ideal is that those folks would someone will intervene to help change that. And I do want to be clear that I'm not suggesting that just because things get hard a little bit, you jump ship. Like, you really should try, right? And
of course,
and be that change agent internally. But it's because and a lot of the leaders that I coach are there. They're like, I've been at this for a year. Now it's impacting my mental health and how I'm showing up. Like, that's when you get to that point, it's like, all right, is the juice worth the squeeze at this point, right? Like, what are we really working towards? So I do the goal setting and the vision work, following that. But I hear you. And I think here's something, an unfortunate thing about HR. I'll call out my own people on this. We often wait until people leave to ask the question about their experience, right? Those exit interviews.
Right.
And we've heard the term like, you should do stay interviews instead of exit interviews. But even still, if
you can say that again. You can say that part again.
You should do stay interviews instead of exit interviews.
Oh.
Right?
That's the podcast right there. Holy moly. I've never heard that ever.
Really?
I think more people need to live by that again. A third time's a charm. You can say it again and then continue on.
Let's
please.
do it. You have to do stay interviews instead of exit interviews. Learn about your people's experience while you have them, not while they're walking out the door, because then you're getting them before that retention issue hits. And the thing is, you have to listen, right? You have to actually follow up on what they're communicating to you, because otherwise they are going to go. So,
man, that was I think I might get this part of the interview and just put it at the very, very, very end, and then just there's no goodbye, there's no see you later, no, just done. That was so powerful. Something so simple is so powerful. A quick thing I usually ask, what has helped you raise the bar? Because the organization that the company that I run, the leadership, is called Raise the Bar. So how have you raised the bar? But I kind of want to put a spin on that. You said this earlier of, I hope people can hear it, where I want people to feel understood and welcoming. Like, I want to be a person that people feel welcome. The moment we talked in the pre-interview piece, and even throughout here, there's something about your voice that is very welcoming. I would say, as somebody of a faith background, says that's your God-given gift. The voice and the way you come across is very welcoming. I think you're in a very good space when you were there and in doing what you're doing. I think it's magical. I don't want to say however, I would say and. Have you, the question being, in your training or your ability to get great at what you do, to go into consulting and helping other organizations out, did you take classes on how to speak or how to be the listener? Like, with that question of how have you raised the bar, what maybe classes can somebody take or courses that you recommend, your own if you want to plug them, but did somebody or a company or organization, a person, a book, a seminar help you get to where you are? Because if I had a way bigger organization, I'm like, pay Juan whatever he needs and bring him on board. Holy moly.
I appreciate that, Juan. Thank you so much. So I have always been a lifelong, I consider myself a lifelong learner. So even throughout my career working internally in organizations, I fully leveraged any PD funds, that professional development funds, that I could get my hands on. And I also needed it to maintain my HR certifications, which I still have. But once I made the leap and went off on my own, a lot of the learning that I've been doing recently has been around entrepreneurship. And just because, as a business owner, you're all of it. I'm not just HR anymore. As much as I want to just focus on, this area that I'm really passionate about, I'm also now a business owner, and I'm a marketer, and, and all the things. I'm my own legal counsel and all that stuff. So have learned a lot about entrepreneurship. But to answer your question, and I really appreciate that comment or observation about my style and my voice, I have worked a bit on that, because we didn't get into it, but my upbringing, I'm from the Dominican Republic, and my parents moved to New York City when I was very young. So I grew up in New York City, in Manhattan, in Washington Heights. But if you know anything about, well, I shouldn't say just Dominican culture, because some other Latino cultures are this way as well. Children are to be seen, not heard, right? So I didn't have a voice as a kid. I was, if you wanted to be a good boy, you do what your parents say, and no questions, no pushback.
Or you get the HR, which was the chancla or the belt.
La correa, right? Yeah. So my voice has been a struggle for me for a lot of my life, like being able to be opinionated and challenge others' ideas, which I think, also makes sense that I gravitated towards HR, because the role gave me the authority to make the change that I wanted to see. It wasn't just little old Juan trying to make a change. So I share all that to say that working on my voice has been a really important part of my development. And I joined a mastermind last year, and I don't know if you're, as an entrepreneur, it's a great way to network and to grow not only your network, but again, your knowledge as an individual. It's Rachel Rogers. She wrote a book called We Should All Be Millionaires. And she's a woman of color. And are you familiar with it? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know the name, but when you talked about the book, I was like, oh, makes sense. No, I've heard of that before.
Yeah, and she's got a club, and it's a mastermind you can join. And I have learned so much in the last year from that group, just being surrounded by other people that had a similar life experience and upbringing to me, and seeing how they're leveraging that as their superpower, and just building their confidence. It builds my own confidence. And yeah, so I would recommend, maybe Rachel's group isn't the one, but find a group where there are people that are 1, 2, 5 steps ahead of where you are right now, so that you have that motivation and that desire to keep moving forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Any parting words before we go?
This has been a blast, Juan. I wish we could keep talking, but
yeah, there's so much more. Maybe I'll have you on again, and we can go more into the psychological safety part of things. But I loved our conversation. Thank you so much. How can our listeners connect with you, and or organizations, maybe school districts, or people who are in business or work for business department that need help with their HR? How can they get a hold of you or possibly work with you?
Yeah. So my email address is Juan, Juan, at DEIProfinder.com. And I use LinkedIn. I leverage LinkedIn heavily for all business connections. So you can find me, Juan Taveras, MBA SPHR, on LinkedIn. I can send you the link to put in the show notes.
Everything will be in the show notes in the description for sure.
Perfect. Yeah, would love to connect with anyone looking to continue the conversation.
Awesome. Well, Juan, or in Spanish we say tocayo, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for all the knowledge. Thank you for helping me understand or answering the questions, or those listeners thinking, I have this issue at work. How do I go about things, or how do I understand my HR a little bit more? Thank you so much for the conversation. Hopefully I can have you back, but thank you again. And thank you for working on yourself, right? I think, again, knowing self, hey, I need to work on this because my voice is not what it should be. And you working on, thank you for being obedient to that still small voice in you to work on you so you can make all of us better. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you.